Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our debate this afternoon. If you're here this morning, I think you will agree with me, what a day, what a fantastic day, and what an inspiring day. This morning's announcements by the Sheikh Mozab bint Nasser and the strategic partners, I think, has given us huge hope for the future. Gordon Brown said that you cannot survive for even a second without hope, and that teacher plus child equals hope. He also said that money should not be a barrier to the spread of education, but unfortunately it is. And our panel today will focus on innovative ways to overcome this very, very serious hurdle. Thank you, gentlemen. Before we begin our debate, on behalf of the speakers, myself, and the audience, I would like to very heartily congratulate Dr. Chavan for your extraordinary achievements and for winning the prize, the WISE Prize for this year. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I will now request the other speakers to introduce themselves briefly to you, starting with Dr. Abu Saleh.
My biography is in the speaker's book of biographies, and I don't need to add to that except the UN-related responsibilities that I had. I served as the co-chair of the United Nations ICT Task Force. I also served as vice chair of the United Nations Global Compact, chaired by Kofi Annan, and also served with Ban Ki-moon as his vice chair as well on the UN Global Compact. And I also chaired the United Nations Global Alliance for ICT and Development. So this is just in addition to what is in the book.
Thank you very much, Dr. Petrinos.
Thank you. My name is Harry Petrinos. I'm an education economist at the World Bank and currently manager of the education department. I'm looking forward to discussing innovative models and particularly the effectiveness of some public-private partnerships.
I'm Madhav Chavan. I work for Pratham. Most of my experience is on the ground level, working in the field, trying to get things together and running. No chairing, no co-chairing.
My name's Chris Cook. I'm the education correspondent at the Financial Times. My experience is neither on the ground nor in co-chairing or chairing. I'm a journalist covering education across the world with a particular interest, obviously, in the financing of education and the links to business that education can provide.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Given that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights calls for the free and compulsory elementary education, and the fact that many governments cannot afford full provision, at least in the short term, what should be the role for public-private partnerships to extend learning opportunities? I'd like to go through each of the speakers, perhaps to start with you, Dr. Abu Saleh.
Human rights. And I drafted the first draft of the 2011 Human Rights on Access to the Internet. The question is not about having human rights declarations. It's about implementation. And as we see from because as I said, I served on UN Development, Global Alliance for Development and ICT, we are far from achieving any of the goals of any of the millennium targets, also as far as many other goals are. I think what we need is feasible, sustainable business projects. The top 20 universities, according to the reports, and in the world are private universities, by the way. Now, what I'm talking about is if we want to solve problems of education, we need to re-gear our thinking, not to be addressed to the global community and not to the global organization. We have to pull our socks in the private sector and promote world-class education. And this is my point. I do not believe in the call for education for everybody.
Dr. Petrinos.
Thank you. Most certainly, education is a human right and is to be defended. And it also has many social and economic benefits. Over the last several decades, countries have made tremendous progress in extending education opportunities to more and more people in their societies. But there's still a distance to go, as we saw this morning in the presentation. And therefore, there's a need to do more and different things. We need more diversity of supply, more innovative models, more partnerships, and we need partnerships that work, that are sustainable, and that are extending models that have been proven through rigorous methods to produce the benefits that we want. And what benefits do we want? We want more children to go to school. We want education of high quality, meaning that children are learning and able to earn a living after schooling that contributes to their personal benefits, social and national benefits.
Thank you very much. Dr. Chavan?
I think it's fair to say that education is too important to be left to governments alone. And I think over the last maybe a whole century, we started thinking that governments should provide education. And I think we are now coming to a point where governments should provide and or provide for education. I think there's a subtle difference, but it makes a huge difference in the financing model. Public-private partnerships also are being, I think, narrowly interpreted in terms of contracting. So the government contracts out services, charter schools, and so on and so forth. But I think we need to look at it from a much larger, broader viewpoint. Even at the school level, there's a partnership between school and home that is required. It's not necessarily about financing, but that partnership between community and school is necessary. The schools these days work in isolation. We think schooling, education is something that is so specialized that they have to work on their own. I think we have to build community-school partnerships, and then this then translates into larger public-private partnerships at the top.
We'll come to the specifics
yes.
in due course. Christopher.
Well, every developed nation, if you look at them, has tended to get to where they are today through a combination, historically, of private-public partnerships. In some cases, such as in the United Kingdom, where I live, it is churches that have provided the first systematic school systems. And we are going back in the United Kingdom to a system where we will have more private providers again and less government. The need to, as we say, to introduce new providers and the need to introduce new blood, to expand quickly. These are things that mean that private-public partnerships will almost always be part of any solution. I mean, it's very striking that in Qatar itself, in the last 2 months, there's been a major expansion of a voucher program to allow existing private schools to be state supporters. The ultimate point about all this is really that no one ever says, I got a degree from this such and such university, but I hate to confess it was a private university. You know, it's a good degree or it's not a good degree. It's a good qualification or not. You're well educated or you're not. Parents, pupils, and students don't care what the legal status of the thing they get the qualification or the education from is. They just care about the education.
Thank you very much. Dr. Abu Ghazali, in addition to your astonishing number of achievements with your organization, I was looking at your CV, and it's quite astonishing. You are now about to launch the Abu Talal Ghazali University. Can you tell me what this aim of this university is going to be, and what financing models do you have in mind?
It's amazing that what we have in mind is exactly what this conference, all this conference is about: innovation, collaborative efforts, and outreach. Now, Talal Abu Ghazali University is not a university in the way you understand universities. We don't have any academic or educational programs of our own. We are a gateway to the leading world-class elite universities of the world. In partnership with these universities, rather than competing with them, we deliver their programs worldwide online. We have to realize that education will face a tsunami. And at least I can quote President of Stanford University, Hennessy, who said that unless the universities realize what the knowledge era is bringing, they will be overtaken by this tsunami. We don't want to be overtaken. What we are developing is a new approach to education, world-class education, at a very affordable cost, because the tuition of the university is less than a quarter of the actual cost of a student going to Chicago or to Boston or to Sydney. So what we are offering is to eliminate all of this, in addition to eliminating the problems of leaving his family, leaving his job, etc., and let alone the fact that most of the citizens of the world will not be able to get a visa anymore. The visa restrictions by the US, by the UK, are imposing very severe hardships on the American and British universities financially.
That's right.
So we're trying to solve that problem for the universities, for our students, so that we can deliver to them world-class education. I don't want education for everybody. I don't want a student to come out of a university with a degree that is not recognized by anybody except the university that issued it. I want a degree that he can throw at anybody and say, I am qualified by an accredited world-class institution. So this is a new approach to education. It is intended to democratize our mission or vision. My vision is to democratize world-class education through harnessing the wonderful capabilities of ICT technologies. ICT provides us now with amazing resources for delivering education to everybody at a cheap cost, at an affordable cost. This is a corporate social responsibility project, but it's not a free project. This is not a charity project. This is a supported project by Talal Abu Ghazali organization, funded by us alone, and it's a private corporate social responsibility initiative, which we think through which we think we are going to change education in the world.
Thank you very much. We've heard of a lot of innovative solutions to education. This morning we heard of some, but today we're focusing really on the financial aspect. So I'd like to turn to Dr. Petrinos. Over the course of your very extensive field trips around the world, may I say, what models, innovative models of finance have impressed you the most?
Thank you for that. I want to mention three very briefly. One from the United States. One of the issues in U.S. education is reaching disadvantaged populations, and one of the attempts to do this is through the so-called charter schools, which exist in many states, but some of these models have been more successful than others. One of the most successful charter schools is in New York City, Harlem Children's Zone, and through rigorous evaluations, it's been shown that these programs improve the reading and math scores of the students in the schools at a level that would reverse the black-white achievement gap. So it's a very significant gain through this program, and a program that can be replicated and is sustainable. The second model I want to mention is from Pakistan in the Punjab, a program that the government started to look at this growing phenomenon of low-cost private schools that were targeting poor families. These schools are given support to improve, and if they continue to improve, get more resources, and they can expand and educate more children. And the program has been proven successful, again, through rigorous impact evaluations. And the third program, I want to mention something that we've been involved with with the government of Mexico in rural areas, a program that supports parents to supervise schools, public schools. And we worked with government and the private sector that donated funds to extend the program through an experiment. And again, we find that the act of empowering parents to oversee and have a little more voice in the school has led to significant gains in terms of test scores for those children in those schools. So those are 3 kinds of models that I've seen that work and that are based on rigorous impact evaluation.
Thank you very much. Dr. Chavan, we'll come back later to some of the points that you raised with the government, but for the time being, could you sort of outline to us the financial models that you have used in your organization?
Well, we are a not-for-profit working on the ground, so we depend a lot on donors giving us funds, and occasionally we can access government funds as well. And there's nothing innovative about that. But I particularly want to mention something that we've been trying recently, which works quite well. And we've started with a secondary school education sector. In a country like India, and I suppose a larger developing world, we find that the countries are really countries of dropouts because not many kids go past secondary education. And so we've started a program which we call Education for Education. We offer free secondary schooling help to young women who have dropped out. So these are 18-plus women. And we say that we will help you complete your secondary schooling over a period of 1 year so you can appear for a government certification examination. The only condition is that you have to repay your debt by teaching 20 children, 25 children in your own village. And I think they are very excited about that. It gives them a sense of pride that I'm not just getting it free. Although policy-wise we keep talking about giving everything free, I think pride comes from saying that I have done something to earn it. I think this is something that we have to understand. While cost should not be a barrier, but sometimes we do things that actually undermine the self-esteem and the pride of the person. And that's why people say when you give it free, people lose the value of it. And this project has actually caught on very well. We are still at a pilot stage with about 2,500 girls. 5,000 actually, we had to take only 2,500. And we are doing similar things in vocational skilling in India, where bank loans for small loans are not possible and the microfinance system has collapsed, where we are saying, we'll give you vocational training, you learn now and pay later, completely on your own, no mortgage, no parental responsibility, and so on. And I'm happy to say that in spite of the mobility of the workforce and all sorts of things that we have, we still can recover about 60% of the cost. So I think these are some ideas that we have been trying around. And I think there's a lot. And then now the private sector, corporate sector is actually coming in saying, we would like to help you with that. For the vocational training, we'll cover the risk. If you can improve your recovery from 60% to 80%, that's great. We'll give you a liquidity to work with and sort of replenish it. So we need to look at what are the possible ways that people can be brought into the school. I also want to mention something that the government state of Bihar in India, a very backward state in India, did. The problem was there were very few high schools, few secondary schools, and girls couldn't reach there. So the chief minister of Bihar, a very remarkable man, declared that he would give girls money, the girls who completed their 8th grade, to buy a bicycle. And it was a flat program across the state, and some people said, you know, they won't really buy bicycles, the money will go this way and that way. But it happened. And girls were so happy, and you could see actually girls going. I'm not sure they were going to schools, but they were riding bicycles. And it worked very well. And then somebody told them, do you know that this is the world's largest cash transfer that you just did? And they'd not thought about that. I think there are a lot of mechanisms that can come. If you look at what the problem is, focus on the problem and the solution, innovation happens. If you just try to be innovative, sometimes you come up with ideas that don't fly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Madhav. Turning to you, Christopher, you've covered education for the Financial Times very, very broadly. But I'd like to ask you, is there not a danger that with the increase in the rise of the private education, I think we read very recently that an Indian organization called GEMS is now moving very strongly into Africa, and there's a huge demand for the private education they provide. But is there not a danger that this system will increase inequality and produce an educated elite based on the ability to pay?
Well, it is obviously possible that you'll end up within countries a situation where if fees are required to enter schools, that only the people who can afford the fees go to the schools. But I think we have to put it all in context. So the first thing is a private school isn't necessarily a privately funded school. So you could have a system where a private school is free to enter for the child, either because of a voucher scheme run by the government, or you could have a system in the United Kingdom, the OECD is very keen on our university financing system, which is actually very similar to your vocational education scheme in India. So the universities cost up to £9,000 a year in England. So not everyone can, well, few people actually could come up with £9,000 of cash each year to turn up to the university. So what they do is a system where the government pays the fees up front, and then you don't pay anything back until you are yourself earning enough money to pay off the loan. It's a clever system because it means if you become unemployed, the repayments just freeze. You don't have to pay anything. And that's a situation where you have private institutions charging very high fees, and the people themselves are able to take responsibility for their, for the courses. They have a stake, right? They're paying, and yet you have equity of access. And one of the very odd things that we found is that even as fees rise, poor children in particular aren't put off from going to university, which is amazing. So we have a situation where we've managed to combine responsibility for the quality of the course on the student, right? The student knows, I'm paying £9,000 for this. I want enough hours in the week. I want to know what I'm going to get. I want my essays marked overnight. And at the same time, everyone can go. So I think it'd be unwise to sort of take a sort of view that there's sort of a binary divide between private and public, and this necessarily means inequality. The other very, very simple point is that the really grotesque inequality in the world today is between the developing world and the developed world. If you can get GEMS or another big corporate provider, the Financial Times, I should declare, is owned by Pearson, which is a giant education company. I have no idea what they're doing. They don't tell me, and we're completely independent, but should mention that. If they were to go in and they were to open 150 schools and make tens of millions of dollars out of it, and they were to increase inequality in, say, Mali, this would be bad within Mali. But equally, it would be reducing the inequality between Mali and the rest of the world. And that's the really big game here. Improving education is almost certainly going to mean, in the short term, increases in inequality of education within the places we're improving. But in the long run, the game is about getting everyone up over the line.
Well, and that's a very interesting theory, Dr. Abu Ghazali. Do you agree that there are several different races being run? On the one hand, you have the national race, if you like, where the equality might increase. On the other hand, your best students will be more equal globally.
At least two of my colleagues here on the panel, we are working with you on the Talal Abu Ghazali University project. We signed an agreement with Pearson to deliver all their courses online all over the world. And we are in discussion with the World Bank, and we're about to sign an agreement with the United Nations also to deliver capacity building programs for government employees, for staff in government. So what we're doing is we believe in proliferating excellent programs for everybody's use. Now, I don't know if this is the time to talk about private versus public, if that is part of the question. I have a report here which is produced by US News and World Report, which says the top 20 universities in the US are private. The Forbes magazine says 90% of the top 100 universities are private. Now, there is nothing wrong with private. And then when we talk about whether private making education commercial or profit-oriented is wrong, all the best universities are, most of them at least, by far most. And I serve today on the panel of experts of the World Trade Organization. the World Trade Organization formed a panel to look at how to shape the future of trade. And part of my mission is to talk about how education can promote trade and how to promote trade in education services, because WTO looks at education as a trade. It's called trade in educational services because it's a service for which you pay price. And I'm concentrating in my report, which I will be submitting to the ministerial meeting of the World Trade Organization, on how education can play a major role in promoting trade, and not just trade for the sake of trade, not just for the sake of knowledge. And as a businessman, I always want to look at the bottom line. Every educator looks at education. Great, we must be educated. Educated for what? I want education for development. I want education for better citizenship. I want education for better economies, benefits for the citizen. So my focus is on how education can make the life of the individual better.
Thank you very much. But before we get to your level of education, which we agree with totally, we still have the problem of elementary education. So I'm going to turn now to Dr. Petrinos. I think you will agree with me that with the rise of private schools, huge numbers of, the quality sometimes is very, very dubious. And some institutions quite clearly set up on a business model. The aim is profit. What can you do about it? Is it possible to do anything about it to make sure that the quality is at least acceptable?
Well, there's a lot you can do, and many people are already doing it. I return to the example of the Punjab in Pakistan. The government program was designed to assess the schools, the private schools that were focusing on the poor, to publish information, and then use that information to finance those schools that were doing well. And that information and financing resulted in better outcomes for those children in those better performing private schools. And those schools expanded while the poor schools decreased in size and eventually left the market, meaning that the remaining good private schools took that share. What we do in terms of trying to assess these questions, important questions about quality and especially equity, we have a 4-point program for assessing the policies towards the private sector in education. And these 4 points include competition. One element of having a diverse supply is that you create a competitive environment which should result in better outcomes for everyone. The second item is autonomy. If you want to give the providers the chance to improve outcomes, they need to be able to make decisions about how to use their resources and their pedagogical models. Third, we believe in the policies about information. So does the public, do parents know how the schools are performing and what they can do about it? And this includes the question of equity. So to us, a private school that contributes to social goals is a school that has open access. It's not a selective school, especially if it receives public funding. And the fourth element is the accountability system. And this is probably the most important function of governments at the basic education level, is providing for society a guarantee about the quality of schools and taking action when those levels, those standards are not achieved. And part of that could be information simply, and could work in a system of choice. It could also be to take action in terms of reducing funding if that's available to those private schools. So I think it's an important question, but there are tools available and tools that are that have teeth that can actually change the education landscape.
Thank you very much. I just would like very, very briefly, Christopher, if you would allude a little bit to the grading of schools that you have places like the UK. Yeah, the better performing schools.
Oh, I see, right.
And the lower performing schools and so on.
So
performance graphs.
Sure.
Do you think they serve any purpose?
Yeah.
Purpose at all?
So there is a so in the United Kingdom, as in increasing numbers of countries, the government insists on publishing data about every single school. So when you're looking for a local school, you can see who is best for, according to various criteria. The real thing we find is that there is enormous variability. So we're talking before about inequality. The inequality between schools, even in very accomplished countries, is enormous. The difficulty really is the choice of criteria, which end up shaping everything the school does. So we have these problems in the US and in the UK with what's referred to as high-stakes testing, which is to say that when you rank a school on one specific measure, the school becomes obsessive about the measure, and then you introduce a sort of second measure, and they will switch and care only about that one thing. So in England, to give you an example, schools are ranked on how many of their children get grades C or above on certain tests. So they have to get an A, a B, or a C to qualify for certain things. If they get a D, the child gets a D, the school drops in the league table. And so if you look at the amount of time that schools spend, they're obsessed with getting children from D to C. And they spend their whole time just focusing on this very little band. And that's a very pernicious effect. If you choose the measures badly for ranking the schools, you can have enormous problems. But the schools do respond, is the good news. If you can choose the right measure, the schools will get better, and parents care about it.
Thank you very much, Christopher. But coming back to you, Dr. Madhav, this morning we heard that the Indian government has decided to own universal education. But you also mentioned that there's been a test case recently between the government and private educators. So do you see a conflict of interest as inevitable?
I don't think it was a conflict of interest. This is a whole issue about equity. In India, in many parts, private schools, elite schools are increasing, and people are trying to create exclusive schools for themselves. And although in theory, in India, you cannot have a not-for-profit education institution, everybody's making profit. And there are loopholes in the law, big, gaping loopholes nobody wants to close. The Right to Education Act, one of the clauses which got everybody's attention at the top of the society, said that every private school, whether, even if it's not aided by the government, must enroll a minimum of 25% of its kids from grade 1 onwards, incrementally every year, from the economically weaker sections in its neighborhood. And this created a lot of issues. Mm-hmm. The financing problem was that if I'm charging $10,000 for the whole year for some of the kids, then how much is the government going to pay? And the government said, we will pay you on a per-child basis what we spend on an average in the state. And everything else you have to figure out. And so there was an issue that means that we'll have to charge the parents extra money to support these 25%. There was one issue. But the real underlying issue was, should my kids sit with these kids? I think that's where it was, the integration issue. And the government said, originally the government said the whole thing is about integration. But in the court, they said, you know, we don't have enough money, and so we would like the private sector to share the burden. The Supreme Court, in a divided opinion, actually ruled that this was constitutionally valid, and so it's beginning to happen. But I think the question is not settled as yet, whether you can force. And the interesting part is, what this is saying, on the other hand, is these private schools, because it's not about elite private schools only. There could be poorer private schools, and they would also have to take 25% students. So the interesting thing is the government is actually saying, go to the private schools, instead of focusing more on improving government schools. And I think this is still going to be in a flux. It's an interesting situation, to say the least.
But very quickly, Gordon Brown last year talked about the Global Partnership for Education, along the lines of the Global Partnership for Health. Now, if you would, each of you, tell us, do you think this is possible? Can it work? Or are we getting far too many international partnerships because we had another partnership and so on? Are these partnerships going to get in each other's way? So perhaps to start with you, Christopher, fairly briefly.
I don't think there's a problem with having lots of different partnerships. I don't think that's the issue at all. The problem is whether, fundamentally, if you have a government that wants to get on and do stuff and wants to exploit aid from the World Bank and other funders to improve its education system, you don't really need a partnership. The problem is where you have a government that is, for whatever reason, resistant to outside help or is fairly indifferent. Is it really going to put itself out there because, or change its mind because of this partnership? And so the problem that Her Highness's initiative is going to run into, I suspect, is the entrenched local interests and how you get beyond. I mean, can you imagine in your own countries whether this partnership is going to have the political weight to force your government to do something it doesn't want to do? That's the real challenge.
Thank you. Dr. Madhav?
Well, like in every international affair, this is a matter of diplomacy. It's a question of how do you convince people? Because I think, by and large, every country has signed the declaration and they're saying we're going to do it. The question is, do you have the sense of urgency, and how closely are you looking at the problem? What is your problem and how are you going to solve it? For example, in the issue of finance, how much should schooling or education cost? And I'm differentiating the two. Is it necessary to set up a brick and mortar school, or for the time being you can start a tent school? Because there could be international standards that will say, in India, for example, the law now says you must have a brick and mortar school of these dimensions, you must have a playground and so on and so forth, otherwise you cannot start the school. And they've shut off all the funding for informal education because the Right to Education Act exists, and there is some sense why it is being done. But if you want to bring the children who are not easy to reach, then it may be necessary to work out informal mechanisms to help them access learning, if not a school. We assume that if you give a school, they will be learning. And I think it's proven wrong, world over. You need to do much more. It's possible that you can have a school but no learning, but you can have learning without school. I think that's proven as well. If we take these things into account and then get the sense of urgency going, I think it will help. But I'm afraid there'll be a lot of diplomacy required. Charming initiatives are required to convince governments to come into the partnership. Perhaps people-to-people contacts will help. It need not be only top-down. I think there'll be allies at the bottom who would like to work with the WISE initiative.
So, talking of allies at the bottom, perhaps, Dr. Petrinos, we have a number of NGOs at this gathering and from all over the place. What, in your opinion, is the role of the NGOs? How do they fit in, and how can they best fit in?
Well, in our assessment of the what we call public-private partnerships, private for us means non-public. So in education, most of the non-public activity is from NGOs and foundations, religious organizations, social groups, etc. So all of that, to me, is private because it's not public by definition. And I think it's vitally important. And there is no one kind of private sector that's required. I think it's the diversity that's important. Just like there isn't one kind of learner, you need a diversity of supply, and the different solutions require different players. So I think the short answer is the NGOs are vitally important in providing the right kind of education in the local context, and they've proven themselves many times. What we lack, though, is a systematic knowledge base of what exactly works for which problem. Part of the problem is that we don't evaluate rigorously in education, but that's changing. There's more and more rigorous evidence coming out. Next month, as a small, modest contribution to the evidence problem, we're going to launch a database of the existing rigorous studies of education interventions, which should help catalyze a bit more searching into what works. But then also we're involved in prospective studies of interventions and innovative models that can work. And hopefully the partnerships that are being talked about will and can rely on this evidence base to select those innovations that work and to take those to scale.
Thank you very much, Dr. Petrinos. Dr. Abu Ghazali, you have a very brief time. Do you consider yourself an NGO? Or is there a difference between...
You missed me on the subject of schools.
Yeah.
And I would like to address that issue with great provocation. I think we need to reinvent schools. If we want to teach 60 million students in classrooms, build bricks, and bring teachers, we'll never achieve it. We have to reinvent the schooling system on the basis of what is the certificate required to go to university. I don't care if the student is in class for 5 years or for 20 years. I want passing certificates that qualify him to go to university. And that is what we are doing in our program. We will take the program, the certificates that are accredited by the top universities, and if you pass this, in Qatar today, there is a refugee from a Lebanese camp, Palestinian camp, whose age is 11 years, and she's doing medicine. Why should she wait another 8 years to tell her that you should get your high school? We need to reinvent education on the basis that we don't need any more classrooms. We need online education of the best and the quality programs, and that prepare you for being qualified to go to university.
Thank you very much indeed. Please join me in giving a warm reception to our excellent panel. We now turn to you with your questions.
我是来自中国浙江大学的吴华。我对刚才各位讨论的这个话题很有兴趣。现在我有一个问题想跟这个
education
交流一下，听各位的意见。
The private sector has played a key role in China.
I don't think we're getting a translation.
And has
这个刚才各位讲的这个公私合作伙伴关系呢，在这个中国的话有广泛的实践。最近中国的话呢，在近10年当中已经全面普及了9年义务教育。在这个当中呢，就是各位讲的这个私立教育，在中国叫民办教育，已经取得了这个发挥了重要的作用。
from the government,
and
that is why they have faced problems. And that is why local communities have begun to support these private schools. But public opinion has not necessarily been favorable to this, because at the end of the day, public funds are being used for funding private schools, and so this is a bit worrisome.
从这个义务教育前9年的义务教育来看，
these schools represent only a tenth of
在私立学校退休的教师，他们所能够得到的社会养老保障，只有同类的公办学校的1/2。所以，一方面呢，是如果不支持，他们就很难继续发展下去。
Their future will be compromised.
如果要支持的话呢，受到
So, what are your proposals? What are your suggestions to help private sector funding?
Did anybody get the gist of Christopher? Do you want to give that a shot?
The core of the question was about whether the politics, effectively, of having for-profit providers meant that for-profit and private institutions were going to inevitably suffer because they wouldn't have the support of the government in particular. That is a very particular problem. There are lots of areas where there's, I don't think prejudice is quite the right word, but it's in that's the right sort of word, about for-profit providers, and a concern that if you have a very profitable company in particular involved in state education, that indicates that they're doing not as well as they could do. The central thing that for-profit providers must do to continue to be able to win public confidence is to demonstrate that they, frankly, just get better results. So the improvement in efficiency and the improvement in techniques and the innovation that they provide outweighs the cost of the size of the profit. So if they make 5% profit, you know what? They have to be at least 5% better, pound for pound, dollar for dollar, than their competitors. I think that's really the only way through this, because there is an intuitive sort of revulsion about for-profit providers.
Dr. Madhav?
I actually didn't understand the full question. And this is probably particularly true in the Chinese context, where I heard the word party structure being mentioned. So the relationship between party, government, and the for-profit or private sector is something that will define all this. Because if I'm not mistaken, the Chinese system is such that the central government doesn't necessarily provide for the provincial education either. So in different countries, it's different. But I think the key point that I would mention, and I'm not sure that it's relevant to the particular question, is that if there is a private initiative, and which need not be for-profit, I think we need to make a distinction that there are educationists who do not have access to capital. Such private initiatives should be encouraged. What happens often is the government takes the view that if you have capital, invest it and then do not-for-profit work. I think it's the other way around. If I wanted to start a school, I don't have a capital. Why should government not help me run a school which may not be for profit? I think we need to draw those lines and say that if there are good people, good educators, then the government will actually support them. This is what the grant-in-aid schools were in some years ago in India, and I think in large parts of the world. So encouraging private initiative need not be encouraging for-profit initiative. And when you do private initiative, because that's where your innovations will come, that's where the new models will come, that's where a school will be reinvented. So I think that is something that is required.
Dr. Petrinos, have you had any experience working in China, in Asia, or countries which are perhaps more socially inclined?
I haven't had the pleasure of working closely in China, but I wanted to make one point related to the question of funds for not-for-profits. I think this is something that's being realized now. There are several funds that have been developed that are operating like regular capital funds, but are targeting what they call high social impact projects, and they are starting to look at education. So I think it's a matter of time before significant amounts of capital are available even to not-for-profit institutions doing education. But on the for-profit, not-for-profit question, I think the evidence suggests that it really makes no difference in terms of outcomes. It depends on what the institutions are trying to do. In some cases, access to capital is very important, so for-profit institutions can access that easier. But there are reasons why a not-for-profit in certain circumstances is preferable. But in terms of outcomes as measured by student testing, where we have both models operating, there is no difference in outcomes. So there's not a question of evidence, but I think that lesson is not widespread. So echoing what Mr. Cook said, I think having more information about what the institutions are doing will in the end help inform the public debate.
Well, Dr. Razale, how do you see this situation?
I have a concrete example. My group has a partnership with Confucius Institute. Confucius Institute is a very government organization, and it's working beautifully as a partnership between Confucius and the Talal Abu Ghazali organization to teach Chinese language and Chinese culture all over the world. And we are working now on providing this program online for all over the world. And I think, and this is, incidentally, is one of the programs our university also is not just for academic and it's not just for school, but also for capacity building in government, also for languages and for vocational training. And I think the relationship with China is a very comfortable partnership.
Thank you very much. We'll go to another question now from the floor. Sir.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Kareem Darwish. I'm from the Qatar Computing Research Institute. I just have a quick question. I mean, I heard a lot of talk about private schooling, and I want to ask a question actually about public schooling. So if you look, I'll give an example, let's say, of Egypt, for example, where in public schools, they are cash-strapped. A teacher makes less than $100 per month, and they need about $200 per month to actually live, which means that they have to work somewhere else, and they don't have enough resources and so forth. So what kind of private-public partnerships can be done not to create necessarily private schools, but to actually save the public schools that already exist?
Yes, please go ahead.
Let me give you, again, another real-life example. There is a university in Jordan, government university, called the German Jordan University, which is a government-to-government public university. We developed a partnership with that university. We took over the entire management of the business school of that university, my group, a private organization, and we run it. We save the governmental organization the problems of cost and financing. We also are able, because we invest our resources, we were able to get the prize last year of the top business graduate school of business in all of Asia. Because of this partnership between government giving us the umbrella and the private sector contributing its resources.
Thank you very much. Dr. Madhav.
That's always a very difficult question to answer. Because in any educational budget, the salary of the teacher or running costs on salaries is always the highest. And if the government is not able to pay and cannot get the resources together, then you have a problem. And especially if you say that it requires $200 to live and $100 is all they're paid, then you have a problem that needs to be sorted out. And I don't know if there is an innovative solution for that or not. The government just has to pay more. But having said that, if this was a micro problem, what I would do is, for example, in the work I do, I would turn it around and say, if don't make it free. You say that, okay, I'll give you an example of when we started our work in the early 90s, 94, we didn't have money, no donors. And our problem was we wanted to start 4,000 preschool centers. And I said that, okay, we'll start a program which will give a nominal sum of 100 rupees, which was about $5 at the most, to the young lady who's teaching, not even $5. And we said that we'll give you training, we'll give you material, and whatever the community pays you is yours. I don't want a part of it. And the model just took off. Now, I don't think Egypt is about to do that, and that's not really the solution that you're looking for. But I think you've got to identify what the problem is. If finance is your problem, then one way is to make more money available, simple. The other way is to cut the costs. And I don't think anybody can really prescribe a solution to you, sir. It's a good question, but no answer. Not from here.
Dr. Petrinos, are governments willing to make more money available from your experience, or are they cutting back? We're looking really at the developing world.
Well, the fear when the last global recession began was that social services would be cut. But what we found in most countries is that there's been a constant maintenance of education spending throughout the world. And in fact, several governments have taken the financial crisis as a reason to reform the system, meaning putting more resources into education. We see this around the world. So it's been a pleasant surprise in many countries to see that education remains a priority and governments are making resources available. And we see this in Asia, in Africa, and many other countries. The governments have provided more resources over the years to fulfill national and international commitments to educate everyone, and these programs are being maintained. I think the challenge is coming as more and more of these children go through the system, finish primary school, go to secondary school, then you have a bigger resource constraint because these are more expensive levels of schooling and a different kind of management issue. So the challenges are still there, but so far governments have been very committed to the goal of education.
Christopher, how would you address this, this conundrum, if you like? Because on the one hand, do we look at education as, in some cases, a private enterprise, or is it a right? Not only a right, but absolutely necessary for economic development for a country. So whatever resources you put into education, you are definitely going to get back out of it as a whole.
Well, I mean, I think we're being slightly pessimistic here, actually. There may be something we can do. Egypt is a curious case because it is famously a place that has excellent teachers, right? I mean, if you meet an Egyptian in another country, what profession will you guess that they do, right? But it also has a peculiar position because it has very high numbers of people who are very well credentialed with lots of qualifications who may not be very well educated. So there's something funny about the Egyptian sort of education system, and I wonder whether, I mean, one of the things we do know about the school systems is that one good teacher is incredibly valuable. And in fact, it's better to have a class with 50 kids in it and one really good teacher than two classes of half the size with two not very good teachers. So I don't know whether this is one of the things that the world should perhaps be moving to is, oddly, a world where there are fewer teachers but better teachers. And I don't know, I can't tell you about I don't know enough to tell you whether that should be something that Egypt's thinking about, that maybe the solution is bigger classrooms, higher paid teachers as a way of squaring the circle. The other thing that's happening a lot in the developed world, so in the UK and the US in particular, is that schools that have fixed salaries for teachers are increasingly having the fixed salary system broken away. So in England at the moment, half of all the secondary schools are charter schools. They're what we call academies. So the head teacher has the power to set his own salary. And that's really important because it means that if you find a really good teacher, you can just whack up their pay and keep them and maybe increase the size of the class too as a way of balancing the books. So, I mean, there is financial innovation sort of capacity in the school system if you're willing to change the way that the school works overall. And that might mean technology, that might mean using new teaching aids, and so you can increase, so that teachers can be more productive and take on bigger classes.
Thank you, Christopher.
I'd like to thank the panel for sharing their thinking with us this morning. My name's Michael DaCosta-Babb. I work with a startup called schools.com, that's 5 O's, social networking software. I have some issues about the nature of education in the future. Urbanism is growing. There's a buzzword, smart cities, okay? So my question is, how smart can education be?
Thank you very much. I think that's an excellent question. Yeah. How smart can education be?
Andrew Short, representing one of these revolting for-profit organisations described this morning, GEMS Education to be precise, a branch called Education Solutions. One of the things that I'd like to comment on is there needs to be a philosophical and perhaps pedagogical shift in our thinking away from education is a right, but education as a free right. One of the things that for-profit organisations can bring to a public-private partnership that we've been able to demonstrate was operational efficiency and access at $500 a year for a private school offering to $35,000 a year to a private school offering, where both students have access to achieving and getting into well-renowned universities such as Harvard. I guess the key question that I have, in support of my Egyptian colleague over in the corner, in terms of its quality teaching, whether it's free or paid. When you receive something for free, often you take it for granted. And what we're finding with our interactions as a private organisation that has a long quality track record, when we are engaging with governments, is their free provision to their communities is not well managed. There is wastage, there is bureaucracy, and it doesn't increase the levels of the students' achievements that they want. By engaging with a private for-profit organisation that is driven by making a profit which it then chooses to reinvest, whether it's through its philanthropic organisation or equity funding and growing, those operational efficiencies provide the results. So I want to hear the panel's thoughts on governments engaging more with for-profit organisations with quality track records, fund them directly through that voucher system, or be it directly giving them the money that they would provide to students in their communities to build brick and mortar or innovative online solutions to raise the standards.
Oh, thank you very much. But before you answer, we've got two questions so far, very, very different. We'll go to the back of the hall, please. Can you keep your questions brief so that we have time to answer it?
I am Dr. Amjad Ali from Pakistan, Professor of Education at university. The role of private sector, there is no second opinion that private sector is playing a very effective role in the development and promotion of school education and higher education. But what I have seen that in low income and lower middle income countries, the private sector is contributing to the gender gap. Parents, they prefer to send female students to the public sector institutions while their male children to the private sector. Is there any solution for this problem? The question number one. Question number two, that how can ICTs be used in an innovative ways to reduce the expenditure and to find the new resources for higher education? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're coming to the final question here, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jean-Paul Mbuyamba, and I'm from the Republic of the Congo, the DRC. And I don't really have a question. It's more a contribution or a comment to what the panelists have been talking this morning.
Can I ask you to make it very short?
Sure,
so
I'll
we give
make
the panel a
it less
chance
than a
to
minute.
respond.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As you all know, we are in a very fragile state and a post-conflict country. And among the many challenges that we had after the war was to increase the quality of education. And to that, we have to deliver more than 6 million textbooks to our kids. And the government didn't have enough resources to do so. The local NGOs and other partners could not help in that manner. So we had to find an initiative way, a new ways of thinking. And that comes the partnership, the public-private partnership, which we call a win-win situation. Win-win because the students get very cheap books at the same price all across the country. The government is satisfied because all the kids get the book at a very low price, and that's also increased the quality of education. Plus, the kids get textbooks which are approved, of course, by the government. And the private sector also is happy because they get their money. That's private sectors.
Can I interrupt you for a second? If you just tell me very quickly, has this worked?
Of course.
How long has it been going on?
It's been on for the past year, and this year, in 2012, it started a new operation again, and it's working very, very good.
Thank you very much. We've got, I think, two questions. One is about smart teaching, which is your baby, and also using cities. Developing to close this very unfortunate gender gap, which I'd never actually thought of. So you have, what, 15 seconds?
Very few seconds. I think the only way to address all the problems raised is to realize that there is a revolution called the knowledge revolution, to move into digital education, online education. Instead of printing books and shipping them, it is cheaper to read them online. It is cheaper to deliver them online. Instead of building rooms and classes, stop building universities and stop building schools. Use the technologies of information, make it accessible and affordable. You take it from the end and you solve the problem, because if you look at the children under 10, I don't see any of them reading a book or reading a newspaper. they are always on the net and they are always online. Thank you, sir.
And thank you, Dr. Abu Ghazali. You had the first word, you have the last word.